Hello, welcome to Salisbury Cathedral and to the reflection for today, Friday the 23rd of October. I'm Robert Titley, the Cathedral's Canon Treasurer, and it's very good to be with you again. Thank you to all of you who have expressed your thanks for these daily reflections. It's really a great encouragement to those of us who speak into the blank lens of a smartphone day by day to know that we are hitting the spot with some of you, at least from time to time. I speak as a watcher and a listener to the reflections, as well as someone who gives them, and I find it helpful to be enlightened by my colleagues as in turn they reflect on the things of this life from the perspective of Christian faith as they have received it and as they proclaim it in their ministry. This week we've had my Canon colleagues, Nigel talking about divisions in society revealed by the coronavirus, Anna talking about the duty of compassion, and Ed talking about the Neanderthals and seeing from that piece of reading that he'd done about our distant ancestors a way of getting a sense of proportion and a sense of humility about our own place in God's time and God's creation. So it now falls to me to offer some reflections from a Christian perspective on what's going on around us. And I find that a couple of people have done it for me. In the last few days, I've been reading stuff about the new COVID rules in the United Kingdom and what they say about us and our society. I read an article by a journalist called Raphael Behr, who introduced me to something I'd not heard of, which is the story of the New York rubber sandwich. You may know, you will know, I hope, if you live in the UK, that the latest COVID rules in our country divide those in England into three tiers. In Scotland, Northern Ireland and in Wales, things are slightly different. And in England, in tier 1, pubs should not be open unless they are serving a substantial meal with the alcohol that they serve. And Raphael Behr's article described something rather similar that was tried in New York in 1896. At that stage, they were worried not about a virus, but about drunkenness. And they said the same thing, that bars should not open to serve alcohol unless they were serving a substantial meal with them. And this gave rise to the New York rubber sandwich. Bars began to place a sandwich behind the bar, and if you came in and bought a drink, what you would actually do is buy the sandwich together with the drink that accompanied it. The sandwich you would leave uneaten behind the bar while you went on to drink the beer or whatever it was that you bought. And customer after customer would buy the same sandwich and leave it uneaten while drinking their booze. As time went by, the sandwich became very, very stale, so it was replaced with a more durable rubber substitute. His point was that rules are vulnerable to the rubber sandwich effect. People just ingeniously try and get round them. And that happens, he says, when there is not a big enough coalition of people to evangelize for those rules. Later on in the same article, he talks about the inevitable absurdities that you find on the boundary between the spirit and the letter of the law. A few days later, I read another article by the columnist Nesreen Malik, where she talked about love for our neighbours, such as that found in Marcus Rashford's work to feed hungry children in the UK in the holidays as well as during school time. Now, my point today is not to argue the toss about the rules for tier one or tier two or tier three, or where you stand on Marcus Rashford's initiative on free meals for needy children. Though I'd certainly want to come back, I think, to the rubber sandwich effect in a future reflection. My point for today is to note where this language that these journalists use is coming from. Evangelize is a straight borrowing from what the church is supposed to do. In fact, I've just come from a meeting with my cathedral colleagues where the word evangelize absolutely came up as one of our agenda items. The phrase the spirit and the letter, that comes from the letters of St. Paul. And the phrase love your neighbour is part of Jesus's summary of the Jewish law, as we find it in his teaching of the Gospels. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbour as yourself. In that, says Jesus, is contained all the law and the prophets of Israel. So here we have two journalists who are not, as far as I know, practicing Christians, who are deploying the language of the Judeo-Christian heritage, implying their trade as those who are offering a critique of our country, our government and its policies. The United Kingdom is a culture that is saturated with Christian heritage, Christian culture, language, images, and much more. If you're sharing this while living in the same country as me, just look at the street names around you or on a map, and you'll see what I mean. And much more than street names, the language of the Christian tradition shapes the way that we see reality, the way we describe reality, whether in using the words we realise it or not. And yet, if you look at the position of the churches, Christian faith, Christian related activity of an overt sort, well, the picture is, from my point of view as a person of faith, troubling. Since the lockdown, there have been some rather interesting and rather promising statistics about the number of people who have engaged with a service online or some other piece of Christian online content, as you and I are doing now. But alongside that, there are the latest in a procession of gloomy figures about those who are actively involved in the life of the church. And it leads me to ponder where this is all going to lead. If we look in years, decades to come, will Christianity in the country of my birth be reduced pretty much to a stock of phrases and half-grasped ideas, lingering on, yet emptied of the faith that gave rise to them, such as phrases like the letter and the spirit and love your neighbour and so on? Will Christian faith, as it were, go the way of Shakespeare in the culture of the English-speaking world? People may use a phrase like being true to yourself or all that glitters is not gold, without ever knowing where they come from, who Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, ever was, or who was the merchant of Venice. Or will somehow we get to a position where, as Rowan Williams put it some years ago when he first became Archbishop of Canterbury and he was asked what his hopes were, he said his hope was that Christianity might yet recapture the imagination of the people of this land. Well, there's never been a better time to look at these questions. There's never really been a better time to ask, in the depths of a pandemic, whether there is anything to this God stuff or not. If that's a question that interests you, and there's a chance that it might do if you've stuck with me in this reflection for this long, one of the things that will help us to discover whether there's more in this God thing that we've known up to now, or if you are a complete outsider to faith, whether there's something in it for you, one of the things we can each do the God-curious person alongside the committed Christian is to acquire and to stick with the habit of prayer. We all very usually end these reflections with a prayer. I'm going to do that today. The prayer I've chosen, as we often do, is the Lord's Prayer. And here are some words that might encourage you to persist with that particular prayer. They're from a book written in the 1960s that's been a real help to me. It's called The Use of Praying by a Methodist minister, the late John Neville Ward. And in thinking about the Lord's Prayer, he says these things. He tells us, use it over and over again. Let it work its way into the depths of, let its meaning work its way into the depths of us. Let us put up with the times when it means nothing, when it seems to be nothing more than a familiar jingle. And let us never lose the faith that it holds all that anybody needs to know. All Christianity is there, he says. In this prayer, a voice speaks to us that is beyond this world, yet intimately associated with all this world's pain and pleasure. So if you would like to join me in this prayer now. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, for ever and ever. Amen. Thank you for your time. May God be with you.